I wanted to talk tonight about confusion. It is, isn't it? I see somebody saying it's perfect. And it actually came about with a conversation with someone who was really struggling with a lot of confusion. And really wanted to underline what a blessing confusion can be. The title I put on the website is "Confusion: The Beginning of Wisdom." As I sometimes like to do, I looked up in the dictionary the different synonyms for the word confusion, and I came up with bewilderment, befuddlement, disorder, commotion, cluttering, disarranging, stirring up, unsettling, and puzzlement. So all of these qualities of mind of being stirred up or disordered or befuddled or puzzlement. The word puzzlement reminded me of a song that I used to love from The King and I, where the king sings about his puzzlement. He says, it's a puzzlement. I just loved the way he said that. And here are some of the lyrics of that song that just seems so appropriate for so much of what we endure in our own confusion these days, our own mind states. He says, "When I was a boy, world was in a better spot. What was so, what was not, was not. Now I am a man, the world have changed a lot. Some things nearly so, others nearly not. There are times I almost think I am not sure of what I absolutely know. Very often find confusion. In my head are many facts of which I wish I was more certain. I wish I was more certain I was sure," is a puzzlement. He says, "When my father was king, he was a king who knew exactly what he knew, and his brain was not a thing forever swinging to and fro and to. Shall I then be like my father and be willfully unmovable and strong? Or is it better to be right? Or am I right when I believe I may be wrong? There are times I almost think nobody is sure of what he absolutely knows. Everybody find confusion, but is a puzzlement." And so that is just a few of the lyrics. And we can identify, can't we, with, that I love the part where he says, there are times I almost think I am not sure of what I absolutely know. And there are lots of times where we're not so sure of what we absolutely know. We have all these puzzlements, and we don't have to think very far, do we? We have puzzlements about racial tensions and racism, and puzzlements about politics and political turmoil and what to do, and global warming or recycling. Remember the commercial where the person was asked at the cash register, "Do you want paper or plastic?" And he went into kind of a meltdown, like, paper or plastic, let's see, paper. And so there was this, huge, big puzzlement about what do I do? What's the right thing to do? Or family stresses, the kinds of stresses. I was thinking about this talk last week. I was sharing a beach house with 9 other people of 3 generations, where we're all together in this house for a week. And, I was watching the mind with all of the things that I was, absolutely sure I knew, and or other people were absolutely sure they knew, and the kinds of dilemmas and challenges that we have when really we're just kind of confused. And so confusion is this unpleasantness, this mental unpleasantness. We can talk about, unpleasant tastes and unpleasant sights and unpleasant sounds. And confusion in the brain is unpleasant. It's a problem, if you will, that this brain of ours tries to solve. Wants to kind of get something that is clear, that we absolutely know. This is from Rodney Smith. He says, the underlying and ancient fear of being naked, exposed, and completely out of control, similar to how our ancestors must have felt when they left the protective forests for the grassy plains of Africa, that this fear persists within the depths of our current psyche and keeps us reaching for thought as a final solution for our safety. So this anxiety about, being eaten and being vulnerable and there being no ultimate safety. He goes on to talk about the time, we can only speculate, but 150 million years ago, give or take a couple, when our ancestors did move out of the forest, where the population pressures forced them, out of the protection of the woods into the plains, and where they were so very vulnerable to being prey. They didn't have sharp teeth, and they didn't have claws, and they couldn't outrun a lot of the animals. And so what evolution evolved, that those who kind of gradually cultivated the ability to think and to have more abstract kinds of thought were the ones who survived, because they were able to kind of figure out how to navigate in a way that was outsmarting some of their predators rather than using their physical prowess. And so 150 million years ago, evolution started on this course of developing a species that had a brain that could think and solve problems and come up with ideas and solutions and, generate communities and share those ideas and solutions together. And it was marvelous. I mean, those kinds of skills obviously are tremendously, wonderfully beneficial to us now. We wouldn't, have the buildings or the art or the creativity, the cities, the political structures. Wouldn't be able to do any of that if we didn't have these minds that were, in some ways, free of our physical limitations. So hugely beneficial. So this thought then was able to begin to organize data in a way that kind of made it useful in a kind of practical sense. Many of you have heard me talk in very many different ways about the neurobiology of our brains, and I like to quote Tim Wilson, who says that any given moment, our five senses are taking in more than 11 million pieces of information, And so this ability to think was an ability to begin to organize those 11 million bits of information. So right now, like literally right now, each of us is taking in about 11 million bits of information. And of course, most of this is operating below our conscious awareness. It's just kind of cruising along in there. In fact, only about 40, they say. They figure that out by kind of looking at how fast people can process flashes of light, how fast the brain can actually discern flashes of light. So only about 40 of them are conscious at any given moment. So what we had to learn how to do as a species was to organize that information into what I like to call file folders, into categories, into systems of thinking. And we learn how to organize that information depending on the people who have organized it before us. They teach us, that this green thing with a, even the word green, everything is learned. This black thing that goes up in the air and it has green stuff all around it. They teach us what this is, and then we see it and we kind of know what it is, and we're not confused, So that the brain has learned how to organize information in a way that's more or less efficient and that keeps us kind of cruising along, trying to help us be separate, to be safe, and to be more or less stable in the world. So the function, in terms of evolution, is to use this brain, in a way to help this particular form of animal to be safe and stable, and, separate individuals. So much of what we know, this is Joanna Macy, she says, much of what we know comes not from our immediate experience, but from constructs that have been created by our previous conditioning, and which in turn have conditioned our processing of our current experience. So these files, if you will, that we create in our minds, not only become what is true, but they also filter all of those 11 million bits of information such that it gets sort of stored in our pre-existing categories, so that anything that is confusing tends to get just disregarded or thrown away as not very useful data. So my brother is a biologist. He's a research biologist in one of the extension services down in Georgia, and he talks about how we, as this is a little sideline, how we, in terms of genetic engineering, get him started on genetic engineering, but that he said the problem is what we do is we're throwing away the rest of the data. We're throwing away the rest of the genes. And so, at some point, we're going to hit a wall on that, and that we're not going to have all that unknown, if you will, data. But we do the same thing, don't we, with our own brains, that we're just basically throwing away the data. And you could even kind of look at that on your way home, where, you pay attention to certain things, and there's just all sorts of data that we just don't pay attention to. Because it doesn't fit those pre-existing categories, those mind states that are what we absolutely know, many facts of which we are certain. And so if it doesn't fit that, it's either wrong or irrelevant. So this is Joanna again. She says the environment is not perceived immaculately, but rather is recognized and interpreted in terms of forms that we have learned to see. Andrew Holacek says the nature of the conceptual mind is to shrink wrap reality. To kind of take reality and kind of shrink wrap it into something that is recognizable. And indeed, many of these files that we develop, many of this kind of shrink-wrapped, constructed nature of our minds occurs when we're really quite young and the brain isn't even formed yet. So we can carry with us some constructs and some way of perceiving reality that actually we invented, either were taught to us or that we actually invented when we were quite young and we didn't understand how, what was happening, and so we made up a story about it. Sometimes we can make up a story that's something like, I'm bad, or this is my fault, or this person died because I was mad at them, and so we can kind of make up stories, because if we don't understand what's going on, the brain wants to kind of put some kind of a spin on it to give us some kind of orientation and organization. And so some of these constructs, many of these constructs, are constructs that we either were taught and incorporated when we were very, very young, or that we made up when we were confused and needed to kind of have some sense of security and stability. I've told you the example one time that when I was young, I was not supposed to be playing with my brother's Monopoly game. And one day when nobody else was home, I got out his Monopoly game and was playing with it. And as I was eating an orange popsicle, and as I was hanging over the Monopoly game with my orange popsicle, it dripped onto the board. And I knew I was in trouble. And so, but I also knew how to fix things. I knew how to clean things. And so I went to the kitchen and I got a little can of Ajax. And I tried to clean up the popsicle with my Ajax. It didn't work. But it's what we do. It's what we do. We try to use these constructs. I knew that cleanser cleaned things. I knew that I was going to be in trouble. I didn't like that feeling of, I'm going to be in trouble. And I was trying to solve that problem by using something that I knew and trying to bring those things together. It's just what we do. It's just what we do. It didn't work very well. This is Rodney Smith again. He says, sense that everything you objectify is thought created. Everything is mind made and has no reality outside of what thought says it is. Now look within and see that everything you think you are, all of your ideas, images, sense that everything you objectify is thought created. Everything. It's a good thing. I mean, 11 million every second is a lot of stuff to process, so it's a good thing. And then Kalu Rinpoche says we live in illusion and the appearance of things. So that's what he's referring to, this way that the brain constructs reality and then lives within it as though it were the ultimate reality. It's a relative reality. It is a relative reality. It's helpful to know what a tree is. It's a relative reality. But in terms of an ultimate reality, it's really not true. Mingyur Rinpoche calls these thoughts, I love this, our neuronal gossip. He says, confusion is the beginning of wisdom. He says it's the beginning of that place where we begin to let go of some of the neuronal gossip, And I love that. I love this idea of these neurons in there saying, could you believe that? Do you believe that just happened and that person just cut you off in the traffic? And, and it's just like, that you watch the news and the neuronal gossip, it goes, it gets triggered, or your partner doesn't, wash the dishes or wash them, and do you believe, and so he says, confusion, he says, is the beginning of wisdom. To let ourselves not know and to be confused, to be a bit puzzled, is the beginning of letting go of our reliance on that neuronal gossip that we rely on so much to keep ourselves organized. It says it's the beginning of wisdom. thoughts that we repeat over and over and over and over and over and over and over, that thing about this is who I am and it's always going to be like this. This is what's wrong with me. Better yet, this is what's wrong with you. Those thoughts that we repeat over and over and over again, as though they were something real. So through our practice, we can begin, first of all, to simply see these mental patterns, these mental dispositions, these movements of the mind, as what they are. They're constructed. They're fabricated. They're made up. They take us out of immediate experience and cause us to filter our experience through these mental filters, through these mental constructs. So when we are directly in experience, in this moment, we don't know quite what's happening. That instruction in our meditation practice, just be with how it is. It's so hard, isn't it? I can watch the mind. I've done this practice for, 35 years now, and I still watch the mind subtly, sometimes not so subtly, but subtly try to fix it, Try to kind of get it to be some particular way that the mind thinks is how it's supposed to be. With this a bit of an agenda that if I don't think about it, if I don't figure it out, and if I don't do something, nothing will happen. So in our simple sitting practice, we can kind of watch that place where the mind just kind of relentlessly just keeps coming in with an opinion about what really, if you were really a good meditator, this is what would be happening right now. Do you know that place? Is that just me? If you were really skillful at this, this is what should be happening. So the invitation Mingyur Rinpoche invites us into is letting go of that neuronal gossip. It's there, because another thing we could think should be happening is that it shouldn't be there. Then we could have an opinion about the opinion. It shouldn't be there. So I should make myself stop doing that. But to bring awareness to the experience of this moment, and it's like this now, and really kind of let ourselves notice, especially in the kind of elemental way, of how is it for it to be like this right now. By elemental, I mean just like where is it in the body? What, how heavy is it? How light is it? What color is it? What does it move? Is it, is it fluid? Is it, what's it like to have this experience right now? Can I just bring simple awareness where the mind doesn't really quite understand why it's there, what's going to happen next, what should happen next, what I'm supposed to do about it, if anything. The mind doesn't know any of those things. And the invitation is to let ourselves pause and rest a bit more fluently with that quality of confusion. So when we are directly in this moment, what we bump into is bewilderment, befuddlement, disorder, commotion, cluttering, disarranging, stirring up, unsettling, and puzzlement. The touching into this moment with freshness and without prejudice. And the mind objects because the mind wants to be in charge. And again, it's not like the mind is doing a bad thing there. The mind, that's in terms of 150 million years of evolution. That's the mind that has said, okay, look, I'm going to help you not get eaten by tigers. And sometimes it can feel like that, can it? When we're kind of really sitting in that place of just being, it really can feel like a kind of life and death kind of threat to let ourselves just be with our experience. But it biologically it kind of is, you know? So that if I'm a great ape and I've just moved out of the forest and into the plains because it's too crowded in the forest and now I'm out on the plains, you know, for me to sit, you know, and wonder if that thing that's streaking toward me, I wonder if this is a lion or not, you know, I wonder what, you know, that's just not, you know, those guys didn't live to be our ancestors, you know. So that, you know, to kind of have that capacity to think and to kind of impose that kind of concern is biologically programmed. That's fine. It's just that we could just notice that in terms of evolution, that particular problem isn't so much of a problem anymore, not too concerned most of the time about being eaten by lions and tigers or bears, but we have a bit more concern about, you know, these places where we get into all kinds of difficulties when we're sure of what we absolutely know, and where we're, in my head are many facts of which I am very certain. And who, you know, when we know exactly what we know, and then we kind of bump into other people who know exactly what they know, and the kinds of dilemmas and difficulties that we have, both in our own lives, in terms of, you know, what we absolutely know. So if I'm at the beach with my family and we're sharing a house for a week and we're all very sure of what we absolutely know, it gets troublesome, doesn't it? You know? Or if we're in politics, or if we're trying to deal with racial tensions, or police, or supporting police, or, you know, supporting people of different sexual orientations, whatever it is that we're working with, to kind of allow ourselves to kind of notice these kinds of mental constructs, and to have just allowing a bit more confusion, a bit more uncertainty, and trusting it a little bit more. This is Bhante Gunaratana about that. He says, in Vipassana meditation, the kind of meditation we're all doing, we cultivate this special way of seeing life. We train ourselves to see reality exactly as it is, which is really quite different from what we usually do. We usually do not look into what is really there in front of us. We see life through a screen of thoughts and concepts, and we mistake those mental objects for reality. We get so caught up in this endless thought stream that reality flows by unnoticed. We spend our time engrossed in activity, caught up in an eternal pursuit of pleasure and gratification, and an eternal flight from pain and unpleasantness. We spend all of our energies trying to make ourselves feel better, trying to bury our fears. We are endlessly seeking security. Meanwhile, the world of real experience flows by unnoticed and untasted. In Vipassana meditation, we train ourselves to ignore the constant impulses to be more comfortable, and we dive into that reality instead. The ironic thing is that real peace comes only when you stop chasing it. There's a story that the Buddha told, and he said, sometimes, somewhere, you take something to be the truth. If you cling to it too much, even when the truth comes in person and knocks on your door, you will not open it. You know, if you cling to the concept. And he tells a story about a young widower who had a 5-year-old son who he loved very much. And he was away on business one time, and bandits came and attacked the village and burned the village, and, you know, scattered a lot of the people and killed a lot of the inhabitants. And when he came back, he saw the ruins and panicked. And he took the burnt corpse of an infant to be his son. And he cried. He was just inconsolable that his son had died in this horrific experience. And he organized a cremation ceremony, and he collected the ashes, and he put them in a beautiful little bag, which he always kept with him. Soon afterwards, his real son escaped from the bandits and found his way home. He arrived at his father's new cottage at midnight and knocked at the door. The father, still grieving, asked, "Who is it?" The child answered, "It's me, Papa. Open the door." But in his agitated state of mind, convinced that his son was dead, the father thought that some young boy was making fun of him. He shouted, "Go away," and continued to cry. After some time, the child left, and father and son never saw one another again. And the Buddha said after this story, he said, sometime, somewhere, you take something to be the truth. If you cling to it so much, even when the truth comes in person and knocks on your door, you will not open to it. And he's speaking of the suffering that follows when we cling too tightly to the functions, if you will, of our mind, of our brain. Sometimes we can think that that if we release the rigidity of this thinking, that then therefore the opposite is true. We should just sort of collapse into disarray and confusion. And he's not saying that either. He's not saying that the mind is bad. He's just talking about the ways that we can cling to our concepts and the discomfort of confusion. You know that place, don't we? Where that discomfort, where you really, we can go back to any of those places that I spoke of at the beginning, racism or politics or, homophobia or our families or, whatever. And we can kind of tune into the discomfort when we are mentally confused, when we really are uncertain what to do. And the invitation really isn't to kind of just collapse and say, well, I'm just confused and disordered and disarrayed and, we'll just let there be anarchy. But to let there be a bit more space and to let ourselves have a bit more room, if you will, to look to see what is the nature of this actual experience. Sometimes the inquiry is, what is mine to do? What is the nature of this, and what's needed here? Not to have ideas about how life is, but to really look and see, how is life actually right now, and how is this life, my life, right now? What is needed right now from me about racism? What is needed right now from me about this situation in my family that is so challenging? What is needed? This is the quote, repeat it from Mingyur Rinpoche again. He says, confusion, I was taught, is the beginning of understanding. Confusion, I was taught, is the beginning of understanding. The first stage of letting go of the neuronal gossip that used to keep you chained to very specific ideas about who you are and what you are capable of. You've heard me use some quotes from Niels Bohr, the Nobel-winning quantum physicist, who was really good at being confused. That was his best skill, he thought. He says, every great and deep difficulty bears in itself its own solution. It forces us to change our thinking in order to find it. He says, those who are not shocked when they first come across quantum theory cannot possibly have understood it. Which is to say, if you're not confused when you're dealing with the world, you cannot possibly have understood it. If you're not confused, you cannot, you're missing the boat here, you're missing the point. Confusion is a wholesome thing. This is Christina Feldman. We are asked to meet this with curiosity, kindness, calming. Calming, and she says, is a verb. She says, calm is not some state when we get rid of agitation. is not a state that is separate from agitation. Calming is a way of being with agitation, not how to fix or get rid of it or have yet more aversion. In life, there will always be formations. There will always be these mental constructs. None of this intrinsically leads to suffering. We need to understand those formations that are agitated and see the calming around them, be with them in a calming way. The grip of agitation relies upon agitation being fed, just as fire relies upon fuel for it to stay alive. So the problem is being agitated about the puzzlement or being agitated about the agitation. And a couple more quotes. I found some really lovely quotes. This is from Pema Chodron. She says, the instruction is a teaching on fearlessness. To the extent that we stop struggling against uncertainty and ambiguity, to that extent we dissolve our fear. The synonym for total fearlessness is full enlightenment, wholehearted, open-minded interaction with all of our world. Meanwhile, we train in patiently moving in that direction. By learning to relax with groundlessness, we gradually connect with the mind that knows no fear. To relax into groundlessness, to relax into that place of confusion. And so can we learn to allow our confusion to be a doorway to deeper wisdom, to really allow ourselves to pause, to rest there, and to open, to see what else is available that our mental constructs don't know about. What else is there? And one more quote, and then I'll end with this. Emptiness, this is from John Tarrant. He says, emptiness is what's left when you take away the thoughts and beliefs that you have constructed around an event. And not knowing is a way to move in the absence of such thoughts. It's a creative possibility. Not knowing who you are allows you to meet an event without pretending it is something else, something that happened before. Then you might experience just what is happening, something unpredictable, delightful, dangerous, safe, like eating a taco or walking down the street. Experiencing it as something brand new. So the blessing of confusion. Can we make friends with that state of our minds that just doesn't know? And be curious. Be curious. The blessings.